before the jungle swallowed the roads, before the rice paddies filled with tracks, before young soldiers learned the sound of metal grinding through mud. The M113 began as an answer to a question every modern army had faced. How do you move infantry through the battlefield without leaving them exposed? The answer was not simple. In the First World War, men crossed open ground on foot and paid for every yard in blood. In the Second World War, trucks and half-tracks carried soldiers closer to the front, but once the bullets started flying, the protection was limited. A truck could move men quickly, but it could not shield them. A half-track could cross rougher ground, but it was still vulnerable, still open, still caught between old ideas and new warfare. After Korea, the United States Army knew it needed something better. The battlefield was changing. Armies were becoming faster, more mobile, and more mechanized. Infantry could no longer be expected to march behind tanks or ride in soft-skinned trucks through artillery, small arms fire, and broken terrain. The Army wanted a vehicle that could carry a squad of soldiers under armor, keep pace with armored forces, cross rough country, and be simple enough to maintain. The early attempts pointed the way, but they were not enough. Vehicles like the M75 and M59 armored personnel carriers had shown what was possible, but they came with problems. Some were too heavy. Some were too expensive. Some were difficult to maintain. The Army wanted a lighter, more practical vehicle, something that could be produced in large numbers and used in many different roles. That search led to the machine that would become the M113. Developed by the Food Machinery and Chemical Corporation, better known as FMC, the M113 was built around a simple but revolutionary idea: aluminum armor. Steel was traditional, steel was trusted, but steel was heavy. Aluminum offered a different advantage. It could provide protection against small arms and shell fragments while keeping the vehicle light. That mattered. A lighter vehicle could be transported more easily, move across difficult terrain more effectively, and even swim across water when properly prepared. The result was not beautiful. It was not sleek. It looked like a metal box on tracks. But it was practical. The M113 was compact, low enough to be useful, large enough to carry men and equipment, and simple enough to become one of the most widely used armored vehicles of the Cold War. It had a driver in the front, a commander near the center, and a troop compartment in a large ramp at the back allowed soldiers to enter and exit quickly. On top sat the vehicle's main weapon, the Browning M250 caliber machine gun. The weapon gave the M113 real bite. The 150 caliber machine gun could tear through vegetation, suppress enemy positions, and reach out far beyond the rifles carried by infantrymen. But in the original design, the man firing that weapon was dangerously. He stood high in the hatch, visible from the waist up, protected by courage more than armor. In theory, the M113 was not supposed to fight like a tank. It was a battle taxi. Its job was to carry infantry close to the fight, let them dismount, and then provide support from a safer position. The soldiers were supposed to leave the vehicle and fight. The M113 was transportation, protection, and support, not the spearhead of an assault. But Vietnam would change that. The first M113s arrived in South Vietnam in the early 1960s, before large numbers of American ground combat troops entered the war. They were placed in the hands of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, known as ARVN. For South Vietnamese units fighting in the Mekong Delta, the vehicle seemed to offer a new kind of power. The Delta was not easy country. It was a world of canals, flooded fields, mud, reeds, narrow roads, villages, and hidden enemy positions. Infantry could move through it, but slowly. Trucks were tied to roads. Tanks were often too heavy or too limited by the terrain. Helicopters could move troops quickly, but they could not hold ground by themselves. The M113 offered something different. It could move through wet ground better than wheeled vehicles. It could cross water obstacles with preparation. It could carry soldiers under armor. And when it came forward with its 50 caliber machine gun firing, it had a psychological effect on enemy fighters who often had few weapons capable of stopping it. At first, the M113 seemed almost unstoppable in some engagements. Viet Cong guerrillas, who were used to ambushing infantry, suddenly faced a moving armored vehicle that could cross terrain, carry troops, and bring heavy machine gun fire directly into the fight. The sight of the boxy green machines pushing through rice paddies and reeds changed the rhythm of combat. But every weapon teaches and the enemy learned quickly. They learned to aim at exposed gunners. They learned to use terrain. They learned to wait until the vehicles were close. They learned that armor did not make men invincible. The hard lesson came at Apbac on January 2nd, 1963. The battle unfolded in the Mekong Delta, where South Vietnamese forces, supported by American advisors and helicopters, moved against a Viet Cong force near the hamlet of Apbac. The M113s were supposed to bring mobility and shock power to the fight. But the battlefield became confused. Coordination broke down, helicopters were hit, and the enemy held firm from prepared positions. As the M113s approached, the exposed machine gunners became targets. The men behind the 50 caliber guns had firepower, but little protection. They stood in the open hatch, their bodies exposed above the roofline. Viet Cong fighters concentrated fire on them. The lesson was brutal and immediate. The M113 could protect the men inside. But the man operating its most important weapon was dangerously vulnerable. Apbac did not end the M113's story. It changed it. Soldiers and advisors began modifying the vehicles, and the gun shields were added around the commander's weapon. More machine guns were mounted. Extra armor was placed where crews thought they needed it most. Sandbags, spare track blocks, and improvised plates appeared on vehicles across South Vietnam. The M113 was evolving. Not in a factory. Not on a drawing board. But in the field, under fire, by the men who depended on it. This was one of the defining features of the Vietnam War. Machines arrived with one purpose, but the war reshaped them. The Huey became more than a transport helicopter. The river patrol boat became more than a boat. And the M113 became more than an armored personnel carrier. In South Vietnamese hands, it began to be used almost like a light tank. Troops often stayed mounted instead of dismounting. The vehicle's armor, mobility, and machine guns were used to break through enemy positions, sweep through reeds, and bring sudden firepower into places where the enemy expected foot soldiers. In the Delta, the M113 could be a troop carrier, a gun platform, a patrol vehicle, a rescue vehicle, and a symbol of force all at once. By the mid-1960s, as American combat forces entered the war in greater numbers, the lessons learned by ARVN crews began shaping U.S. use of the vehicle as well. The Americans saw what the South Vietnamese had discovered. In Vietnam, the M113 could not simply drop off infantry and disappear to the rear. The terrain, the enemy, and the nature of the war demanded something more aggressive. So the M113 became the foundation for the armored cavalry assault vehicle, the ACAV. The ACAV was the war's answer to the weaknesses of the original vehicle. It added protection for gunners, more weapons, and often extra armor underneath to help against mines. The standard 50 caliber machine gun was joined by additional M60 machine guns, giving the vehicle firepower in multiple directions. What had once been a troop carrier was turning into a fighting vehicle. The transformation was practical, improvised, and very Vietnam. It was not perfect. The M113 was still vulnerable to mines. It was vulnerable to recoilless rifles and later rocket-propelled grenades. Its aluminum armor could protect against many battlefield dangers, but not all of them. Inside, the vehicle could be cramped, hot, loud, and frightening. Many soldiers preferred to ride on top, where they had air, visibility, and a better chance of surviving a mine blast beneath the hull. That choice said everything about the war. Armor protected you from bullets. But mines made the inside feel like a trap, so men rode exposed on top of the very vehicle built to protect them. They sat with rifles across their knees, boots resting on warm metal, eyes searching the tree line. They listened for the crack of gunfire, the thump of mortars, the sudden metallic violence of an ambush. The M113 carried them forward, but it could not remove fear from the journey. No machine could. Still, to infantrymen moving through hostile country, the sight of an M113 could mean hope. It meant firepower was close. It meant wounded men might be pulled out. It meant a convoy might survive an ambush. It meant that in a war of mud, heat, distance, and uncertainty, there was at least one machine that could keep moving. The M113 was not glamorous. It did not roar through the sky like the Phantom. It did not carry the mythic sound of the Huey. It did not have the heavy intimidation of a Patton tank. But it was there. On the roads, in the paddies, near the fire bases, beside convoys, in the rubber plantations, at the edge of the jungle. It was a machine built for one kind of war and transformed by another. And by the time American forces committed fully to Vietnam, the M113 had already begun its journey from armored taxi to jungle workhorse. Its story was no longer just about design. It was about adaptation. It was about soldiers changing their machines because survival demanded it. And in Vietnam, survival was often measured in inches of armor, seconds of warning, and the sound of tracks moving through the mud.